discuss the power of diversity, equity, and inclusion with influential leaders across the country. My name is Teresa Palacios Smith, and I'm Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for Home Services of America and Berkshire Hathaway Home Services. And today I am honored to introduce you to individuals who have made such an impact on me, Chris Jenkins and Bruce Orenstein. I learned about their Shame of Chicago, Shame of the Nation documentary series about a year ago and knew right away that I had to get involved. We're going to soon delve deeper into the details of the series, but I'd like to emphasize that the moment our CEO, Gino Blafari, and our Chief Administrative Officer, Dana Strandmo, along with our Home Services Foundation for Housing and Equity Board, were told about this project, they were all in. So let me introduce these two individuals because I'm so excited for you to hear about the work that they're doing. We're actually here live in Edina, Minnesota, where this film is going to debut at Edina Realty at the Minnesota Twin Cities Festival. So first off, director, writer, and producer Bruce Orenstein of the Shame of Chicago series. Bruce is an artist in residence at the Cook Center on Social Equity at Duke University. In 1991, he founded the Chicago Video Project, one of the nation's first studios dedicated to producing educational videos on social and economic issues for grassroots social change organizations, policymakers, and the media. His television credits include Emmy-winning WTTW documentary, No Place to Live, and the national broadcast PBS documentary, The Democratic Promise, The Life and Legacy of Saul Alinsky and the American Idealist, the story of Sergeant Shriver. Welcome, Bruce. I'm excited and can't wait to learn more about your project. Chris Jenkins. Oh, absolutely. Chris Jenkins is an award-winning journalist and documentary film producer and also co-writer of the Shame of Chicago series. Over his 20-year career, Chris has told stories about social justice, identity, and progressive culture with a focus on race, class, and equity. Chris is the producer and writer of the award-winning documentary Trapped: Cash Bail in America, streaming on YouTube Originals, and producer of Anthem, a feature documentary which debuted at the Tribeca Film Festival and is currently airing on Hulu. I'm going to watch that next. He also served as story producer for Hustle, which is going to be released in it's a docuseries on the life and times of the rapper, activist, and entrepreneur Nipsey Hussle. Gosh, this is amazing. And for nearly 2 decades, he was also a reporter and editor at the Washington Post, where he covered and led award-winning journalism around politics, criminal justice, immigration, culture, and race. There's so many credits to both of these individuals that I can't even go over all of them. I'm just letting you know that I'm honored to have you both on this show. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Teresa.
I mean,
yeah, pleasure to be here.
I am so excited, and I wanted to find out, for those who have not heard about your series or not familiar with it, can you share what it's about so that people can be excited as I am?
Well, first, Teresa, thanks so much for having us. Bruce and I are really, really honored to be here, and I'm really honored to have had your support for over a year now. But instead of me just talking a little bit about the series, why don't we watch a short clip that we, I think, have teed up for your audience?
Oh, I would love that.
Okay.
Negro families have lived in a state of fear and isolation. It's become the shame of Chicago and the shame of the nation.
Previously on Shame of Chicago.
If a black family did want to live in an integrated situation, this was not within the realm of possibility in the 1950s.
FHA's guidelines recommended against loans to, quote, neighborhoods with inharmonious racial groups.
The court ruled that restrictive covenants could no longer be legally enforced.
Covenants started to fall, and black folks basically started testing them.
It was Chicago's worst racial disturbance in more than a decade.
Chicago, up through the 50s, was subject to a very consistent bombing campaign to keep black folks from buying in certain areas. Domestic terrorism.
This was like a welcoming committee. Every time a black family moved in, they would really set off the bombs. And go back to Africa and jungle bunnies. We heard that all the time.
people chanting over and over, "Niggas go home, niggas go home."
60 to 70 firebombings a year against black families attempting to move into Chicago's white neighborhoods.
The fire department can't get in because there are 1,000 people out in front of the place. It was bad, bad, bad.
I will tell you now, I am against it, but I am not against integration. If they want to open up some other place and have their own schools and their own stores like they have done in the South, and it has worked just beautifully to the advantage of the colored and to the white.
Do you think that integration is a viable goal in this country?
America does not have integration, it has racism. And if you're saying, if you even ask the question, you are in effect saying that America is suffering from an incurable disease of racism.
Wow, it's unbelievable. And by the way, I never really knew a lot of the history behind what, so we're doing a lot of, historical background within the real estate industry. And it was actually Gino, our CEO, who first introduced me to The Color of Law that Richard Rothstein wrote, where I started to research and look at all this and realize what I didn't know, because a lot has been hidden. And so what inspired you both to create the series, to delve into this topic, and what is your overarching message or theme that you want to convey through this phenomenal, powerful documentary?
Okay, thanks again for inviting us. This is such a pleasure to be here. This is a history of housing segregation in Chicago and how all Chicago kind of led the nation in so many ways in creating the structures of housing segregation, the racial divide we have in our cities today. And I came to this story as a community organizer many, many years ago, thinking, working in communities that were affected by so many different social issues, about poor schools or high crime rate or concentrated poverty. And when you start to ask the questions about why do we have these challenges in our community, you go back to the history of housing segregation in our cities. And that's really the underlying motivation for me to say, I've got to tell this story. I've been working on these issues all my life. It's about time I tell the story.
And what a story. And Chris, how about you?
When Bruce approached me to work with him on this, it really dovetailed with so much of that I've worked on, in my career, both not only as a journalist, but as a social worker in New York and the Bronx in the 90s. But more importantly, when I looked around the last couple of years and some of the awakening that I think all of us Americans have had about some of the issues that Bruce just mentioned, what I loved about the approach was that it was so fact-based and data-driven. And trying to get to the seminal issues that really our country is still struggling with. And, it was, as your audience will find out is when we debut it next year, these are, 5 30-minute episodes that really get through the history in a bite-sized but comprehensive way, in a way that people can really digest and think about and then engage with our content. And so not only the way in which we're telling the stories, but also the notions of our history and trying to come to terms with some of the things I think we all know have been problematic about our American democracy. This gets right to the heart of it. And, just really an opportunity to do a lot of the things I also did as a reporter, which was get into urban affairs, writing about the conditions of folk. And this just is the ground, just laid the foundation for so much of what I did when I was covering Washington, D.C. And other places around the country.
There's so much work and so you said there's 5. So I'm going to ask you what the name of the different 5 series are, but can you also provide the insights into that process, because I've never done that. So what is it, the research, the interviews, the footage that was used to tell these moving stories? Because I'm looking at it, you've got all these incredible background, historical document, pieces. So how were you able to bring, that history together? What was it how did y'all get that coordinated? And what challenges did that face in bringing the history to life?
It takes a long time. You have It's a labor of love. It's a labor of love. There are thousands upon thousands of little pieces to this. And look, I've known some of the historians who are really they're the people that are telling the story. And it was a matter of pulling them together, and we brainstormed about how do you break down this really complicated and long history, and how do you turn it into something that's going to be really easily digestible, moving, compelling, yet, as Chris pointed out, really well fact-based document. These are scholars that are talking, and we have to make sure we've got everything right. And so it's taken 6 years, and the challenges are all along the way. Everything from just getting in to do the research and finding the right materials to raising the money for it, which is why, like Berkshire Hathaway, Home Services of America made a huge contribution to this. And so, and we're still working on that. So that's how a project gets done. It takes a lot of love and a lot of elbow grease and a lot of money.
The other piece about that is just the documentation that Bruce just mentioned. We dug for letters from various different real estate agents to each other, from other city leaders to other city leaders, trying to figure out what they were doing to try to racially segregate their cities. There's tons and tons of footage in later episodes from local TV stations, stuff that really has not been seen since, I would also hazard, in terms of yes, we can have the scholars and they are really important, but so much of this is showing and not telling, and showing people the documents that go into or went into the segregation of our cities. And that's really the heart of we can talk a little bit about this because I know, Teresa, you're really interested in this piece, but the central questions we're trying to answer are why have they been so racially segregated? And then what has that led to? And what that's led to is the tremendous wealth gap we have in this country between African Americans and white Americans. It just didn't happen by accident. The wealth that many white Americans have accumulated over the years has been largely because of this wrapped up in their homes. And those are homes and loans that they were able to pull out and receive mainly in the mid part of the 20th century. And African Americans were largely walled off from those opportunities. And it largely, in that system, largely was created in Chicago by realtors in Chicago. And so, these are, but, you don't want to just believe us, right? You want to see and hear how that happened. And we have the goods. We have the receipts, as the kids say these days, on exactly how that communication and how that web of communication and web of logic was created largely in the early part of the 20th century and in the mid part of the 20th century as well.
Well, and not only that, if you look at right now, National Association of Real Estate Brokers, they do their state of home ownership for Black America, and it is the lowest still. It's at 42%, which hasn't changed much in 20 years. Whereas you look at others at 76% with most, other communities, the white Caucasian community, other minority communities kind of lag behind, except for the AAPI community. They're still behind, but they're probably the most, as far as home ownership, the most abundant in that space. And it all is a domino effect, but y'all were like detectives, because you not only had to chronologically, you had to like what happened first, it is really a lot of work, and I can see both of you, the passion that you have for it. There's a lot of themes. They're really complex and related to social justice and civil rights. So how were you able to navigate the responsibility of presenting that history in a way that's informative and emotionally resonate for the audience? Because I know sometimes, people don't want to hear it. There's great, some that are like hiding, So how were you able to do that?
I think what Chris said earlier is that you show, you don't tell people. I'm we're not telling people what to think. We're showing people what happened. And the way that you most effectively show that in order to be compelling is you show it through the stories of how it affected individuals throughout our history that play these, that are scattered throughout all the episodes, the people who experienced it, the people who implemented the policies that, led to the racial divide. So it's really, the combination of those two things. And then a good film will have a narrative spine to it. And the narrative spine that repeatedly that we come back to is that look at how this one devalued African-American property from the very beginning, from 1908, where white realtors said, if a Black person moves into a white neighborhood, then that devalues the property of white residents. We're talking about Black doctors, Black lawyers that they were excluding during those years. And from that very beginning in 1908, all the way through well until the 1960s, there was that notion that Black presence in a white neighborhood devalued property. That's one major theme. The other major theme is the racial wealth gap, how that then contributed to the racial wealth gap that we have today, which is so evident in how people build wealth through their homes or don't build wealth through the ownership of homes and where the
that's your inheritance for so many families too, and the ability to use that equity to go on to college and to further advance your family. And that's why we believe so much of it as realtors. And I know that it started in the Realtor Association, which is actually headquartered, National Association of Realtors is headquartered in Chicago. So all of it just starts to make sense, even more so with the information that y'all are both providing. And Chris, for you, I know that there's a lot of pieces in this filmmaking process. There's that research that you already talked about, the collaboration. How do you verify? Because somebody can come back and say, oh, that's not true, because I know you fact check a lot, right? As well as what experiences did you have with working with experts, historians, just to make sure everything is laid out so that people can understand the ramifications of what happened and how we can move forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, so much of what I think motivates people to say, how do you know that, or what's not true, is sometimes a political bias, and, we would like to, well, I hope that people trust the fact that even though, we are bringing forward information that can be tough for some folks to hear, that the folks who have done the research over the years have, are scholars. We're not just plucking people out of nowhere. These are folks who have written the books, who have already done so much of the research. So we trust and also cross-check with the documents that we found ourselves, right? So, there are two different things going on, at least as it relates to how we go about the process. As a reporter, so much of, when I was at the Washington Post, so much of what you do is you, are talking to experts all the time. And that you just have to get used to the fact that you're talking to people who know more than you, and let them not necessarily guide, but certainly you trust the fact that that their relationship with the truth has been really something that you can verify and trust. But there's also just the point of us doing our own primary research. We hired two fabulous archival researchers, who, as anybody knows, it's you have a team of people when you are doing a documentary like this. And so even though we don't have 300 people like you might see at the end of a documentary, a lot of times there are a team of researchers who know how to find, like I said earlier, the receipts, the primary data, where we are letting people speak for themselves in a lot of ways, both on the side of folks who are trying to segregate our communities. But one point I'd like to make about this series is that we are all also very intent on showing how African Americans at every turn were fighting and pushing back, and actors and agents in their own lives and history. So while there certainly were quote unquote victims of a system that was being developed. Largely what was going on also was folks who were fighting, had agency, and so much of Black history, these even as someone who's in their early 50s, learned about Martin Luther King, civil rights movement, Frederick Douglass, slavery, so on and so forth. So much of what was going on in the 20th century were hidden figures, so to speak, who were on the ground fighting every single day against some of the things that were happening to them, to find agency, and to really find the American promise for themselves. And so while the documents that we found that we know that are 100% accurate and true, because we are letting so many of the actors speak for themselves, both on the negative and positive side, so much of what we were trying to do also was give voice to people who have been lost to history books. And I think when your viewers today, particularly at the Twin Cities Film Festival, will see the fight that so many African Americans took on in so many places around Chicago and around the country to fulfill the American promise.
And it was around the country, because I know it started in Chicago, and Bruce, you kind of brought that up initially, but these were, positions that were taken, especially through the many of the realtor associations that many of us belong to. Now, one of the things too, we talked about 5, and you haven't mentioned them yet. I really want our audience to know, tell me about do you have those all lined up, the name of the series? Can you just tell me what they are? Because I really am.
Shame of Chicago, Shame of the Nation. This is going to be like trying to remember my 5 children, right? So the first one is The Color Tax, Origins of the Modern Day Racial Wealth Gap. The second one is The Chicago Plan, where it all kind of started to percolate and come from. Chicago, Center for the beginning of the National Association Board of Realtors. The third episode is White Covenant, Red Line, about redlining and covenants and how they led to it. The fourth episode is A Million in Captivity, how during the 1950s, so much of the mold for segregation really hardened. And the fifth episode doesn't have a title yet because we're still working on it.
Perfect. I love that. I mean, I'm just so, again, interested in each one of these series, and I'm hoping that we can also get some supporters out of our broadcast that can help you finish the entire series. Now, one of the things that I think is really important to also talk about is how this is, and you mentioned it, Chris, the societal and political relevance of this documentary, but what's the impact that you hope you will get out of in raising awareness across the country, whereas discrimination, inequality, and civil rights. What are you wanting to do, not just in Chicago, but beyond that? And whoever wants.
Sure. So for me personally, we certainly want, first of all, it's a series for everyone, Black, white, Latino, Asian, Native American, everyone, of all political stripes. For those who may know a little bit about this, we want to deepen knowledge. For those who don't know anything, we'd like to bring them to an understanding of so many of the issues that they may have questions about in our contemporary life, contemporary America. I think everything starts from having a deep three-dimensional understanding of our country's history, good, bad, and ugly. We obviously are in a time in our country where we're wrestling with a lot of things as it relates to facts, truth, our history, where history should be taught, so on and so forth. So there's that element of it. But for us, I think there's also an element of activism, and we leave people who are watching to take this and be able to not only understand and deepen their knowledge, but also create either opportunities, either on the political level or on the grassroots level, for people to enact reforms. We leave that for the activists and the advocates and people of goodwill to be able to take the knowledge and not only understand more, but then act on it through advocacy, engaging the political process, and also teaching other folks about what they know. So that's so for important. Me important.
That teaching, Pete, is so important. And Bruce, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think to have a common understanding of how we got to where we are today is so important for us all to be able to think about how do we move forward and repair, remedy the mistakes of the past. And so that's, I think, its major benefit to the series, or what I'm hoping is that it will provide a base understanding of how we got to where we are today vis-a-vis this issue of housing and segregation, and that will be valuable to anyone from policymakers to school teachers to what have you. And hopefully there'll be some positive outcomes over the years. It's a long-term go-to educational resource. This is not just a movie that's going to be up there, and by the way, it's going to be free on a website, so it's not going to be behind a paywall. So again, that gets to the point of this being a long-term go-to educational resource for teachers, high school, college, for policymakers. We've shown it to all kinds of policymakers, and for the real estate industry, definitely for the real estate industry. Why do we have fair housing laws? Boy, if you watch this documentary series, you will then understand why we need fair housing laws in the 21st century.
So true, Bruce. One of the things that I'm excited about, like we spoke about, we're going to get together with the whole group, with the realtors, and this is a fundraiser for the Edina Realty. They do a lot of work, great work. And so what does this exposure mean to you and your team, for our real estate organization to kind of start to impact? And that's really the whole message I want to get across, is that if you are interested and you are a company, we would love to introduce you also to Bruce and Chris, so you can also air it at your company events.
Yeah, I'll just jump in real quickly, and then I'll give it to you, Chris. I think realtors may be one of the most important audiences. I initially started this because I'm working at Duke University, and I thought, oh, all the university professors around the country, all the college instructors around the country, they'll want this as a resource. I know they will, and yes, they will. But once we started to work on this and we found interest from people like you and your company and so many other people, the Chicago Association of Realtors in Chicago have, granted us money, and we just got off the phone with them about holding a special presentation for realtors in Chicago. So I'm just so excited about getting this message out to the real estate industry. It is grappling with this past in such a positive way and moving forward in such a positive way. And I hope this makes a contribution to that. And I hope it's useful for realtors around the country.
Chris?
I think Bruce said it perfectly. I mean, it's not only real estate, but it's banking. It is politics. I mean, there are lots of actors that need to see and to really engage with this content and reckon with some of the things that happened over the last 150 years or so. But the real estate industry, obviously, it's a tough history. It's a tough history, but we know it's one that the real estate industry is already taking stock of and trying to repair. And so we're just hoping that this can deepen an understanding to arm themselves with even more knowledge about how things came to be.
Well, Charles, one of our past presidents of NAR, just really kind of did a huge apology. It was a public apology over all the things that had happened. And again, we opposed the Fair Housing Act, if you can imagine that. So, all of the history, again, this is really important for all of us to be aware of. And I know that you're not done. I know that you're still, need to finish the project. And I want to talk to about that. So what is it that you need to complete all the work that you are both passionate about? And how can we, our community, help you advance those initiatives?
We're closing in on two goals here to get this out and on television and then distributed around the country. And one of the goals is, yes, we need to raise additional funds to purchase all the amazing archival footage that we've identified. And that's, quite expensive. And we want to bring that from beyond the paywall of those that own the rights to it and then make it available to the general public. The other really critical goal is the ongoing educational goal, so that we continue to educate the community beyond just showing it on television and beyond just having it up on a website. So we see this as a multi-year effort of, really establishing the series as an important educational resource. Those are the two things we need funding for.
I love that. And I can tell you that, as our organization, along with others that we're connected to, see the series and see how beautifully and masterfully it's done, that I think you will get that support. But again, I'm reaching and calling all donors, because we donated. We felt so passionate about this project, and so fundraising was really important for us. And so if you're out there, and again, we would love your support on the finishing the number 5, right? We're finishing the series. So where can people go, to check out the series and donate? Let's hit that one. So if they want to donate to this project, because I think our biggest donors are individuals that really are passionate about particular projects, and it may be the public and not necessarily government agencies or funding organizations. So where can they go to learn more?
So they can go to shameofchicago.org, and there's a donate button prominently placed on the homepage.
Simple,
easy,
right?
And there's plenty of information about Bruce and myself, about our advisors, about the scholars who participate in each of the episodes, a funding grid on if there's high-level donors. There's all kinds of things that we are levels of commitment, and we offer an executive producer and producer credits and that sort of thing, depending upon the levels that folks want to give. But most importantly, you can learn a lot about not only each individual episode, Bruce and myself, our advisors, but where to contribute, and our trailer as well.
And I love it, because it's so easy to find. You pull it up and all the information is on there. So I know this is probably the most exciting thing ever, is that your series is going to air on public broadcasting stations. It's going to air in Chicago and also available across the country. So for those of you that have PBS, reach out to them, let them know you want to see it. And this is going to be in April of 2024, which ties in beautifully for us in the real estate industry, because it's Fair Housing Month, right? So tell me more about the events leading up to the broadcast.
So,
okay.
You want to go ahead, Bruce?
Oh, we're going to just have a big kickoff in Chicago with all the radio stations that are a television station that's involved in it, and there's several radio stations and a newspaper and the Chicago Community Trust. In Chicago, then the following week, prior to the episodes that really focus on the real estate industry in particular in the early 20th century, the Chicago Association of Realtors is going to have a big event. And then after that, the teachers will have an event, the religious leaders will have an event. So we're trying to create a discussion in Chicago. But again, the local television station, Chicago WTTW, makes it available to PBS stations across the country. And so it can get picked up in other communities. And one final thing about, this is a nonprofit project. It is all tax deductible. It is all 501c3 charitable, effort. And so, again, a labor of love for us, but a labor of love also, for you, Teresa, which I've noticed, and which is so deeply appreciated. It takes us all to lift up this history and get it out there to the rest of the country.
Well, and I do want to give credit to Camilo Concepcion, who was the first to bring this project to me. And we met at the National Association of Minority Mortgage Bankers, which, again, I've talked to Tony Thompson, and he's definitely going to be interested. He wants to debut the film there as well, because that project, he was so excited about it. And again, like most people, right? I said, that's been seen. I did say that. Okay. Oh, I've heard about that. I've seen it. But he would not shut up about it. Like, I'm not shutting up about it. And I said, okay, let me take a look. And that was all that it took for me, is actually learning about what y'all are doing, all the different projects that are going to make up the series. by chance, which is your favorite? Like, which one did you find is either number one, the most, disturbing, or most something you learned that you didn't know of the 5 that you're doing?
Well, for me, I think we've heard of redlining, we've heard of residential covenants, racially restrictive covenants. We've heard of social Darwinism. We've heard about a lot of things that we cover in this series, but was new to me, even as a history major 30 years ago, and someone who thought, he kind of knew about this stuff, about how everything's connected. And I think what's incredibly eye-opening, even for those who know about things independently of one another, I think what I've learned, and it's 100% true, is how all these things are interconnected. And you'll find out in the 3rd episode, what Bruce mentioned, the white covenant and the red line, about how racial restrictive covenants led directly to redlining. And we won't spoil it for you, but essentially, the things that, again, that I sort of knew about either through reading or studying, or read an article here or there. I think what we're able to do is really, as Bruce mentioned, throw a narrative through line, which is a historical through line, which is an accurate through line about how all these things were interconnected in a real web. And I think that's incredibly eye-opening. And just one last thing about what has been eye-opening and really emotional, I think, is just the humanity that we try to pull out of, particularly in the color text, of the folks who were struggling under these systems and fighting against it. And these are regular old folks, working class folks who are just trying to own homes, find some dignity in their lives. Every time I watch some of these things that folks say in these episodes, it gets me right here, because you're talking about just folks who are just trying to make it. And that ultimately is what we all Americans share, is trying to make it, trying to get to the next rung. And so that's really, really, I think, important for folks to keep in mind as they go into the series and watch it.
They're silent heroes is what I consider, those individuals that constantly are fighting, but you don't know their names or who they are until you put them in the face of us, where we can actually see that. How about you, Bruce?
A favorite of my children? I'm going to be diplomatic.
You're going to be good, huh?
I'll just pick up on what Chris said at the very end. I went to see Martin Scorsese's film Killers of the Flower Moon yesterday.
Yes.
And it's about Osage Indians in Oklahoma in the 1920s and what happened to them. And I was brought into a different world and learned something so, illuminating I had no idea about. Well, maybe that's not a great comparison, but but I think that everybody that's watched this, no matter what their level of literacy is on the subject, has told us that it really deepened their understanding of it in a significant way. And so that's what we hope that this series does.
Well, it's an illumination. It's definitely, I love that word, because you are educated and you can't help to understand. And you said, Chris, there's a domino effect. There's a domino effect that one cause, this, and that's what you see today. And I can't believe it, but can you believe it? We're almost done. And I always, want to encourage those that have not had the chance, or will not until it debuts in April. Go to the website, check it out. You'll definitely, and if you have in your capability of donating, do it. And if you know someone else that might be interested, please let them know about the series, because that's really how we're going to be able to get it completed. And I certainly will do my very best to promote it everywhere that I can. Both, Chris and Bruce, I want to let you know that that's my commitment, because that's, for me, it's about education, about learning. So now I always end with a fun question or something that I want to learn about each of you. And so my question is, as we wrap this up, is if you could have dinner, and I'm going to start with you, Chris, with anyone, whether alive or no longer with us, who would it be and what what's the story behind your choice? Why would you choose that?
Sure. Well, thought long and hard about this. Lots of people, but I love sports. I love baseball. I love history. I have an appreciation for African American history and figures in African American history. And someone who is somewhat misunderstood, I think, a little bit, Jackie Robinson. Largely because not only do I love baseball, like I mentioned, and he was a superb baseball player, and I would dare say one of the best athletes of the 20th century, was sometimes not fully understood of how good an athlete he was. But mainly what I would like to talk to him about, if I could, is the determination, the steeliness it took to do what was necessary in order to move America forward. He was picked for a reason because he was internally a politician. He knew that he had to take it and could not do the things that any normal person would do when they are being, kicked, abused, spiked, spat on, called all kinds of awful names by in this case, the fans in various different ballparks, and to, have a stiff upper lip, square jaw. And we all know that probably took a toll on his ultimate, health as he got older. But that kind of ability to do what was necessary for the collective, and to withhold individual emotion or reaction to a circumstance, and understand the greater whole, while still being excellent at what you do every day, I think is sometimes not fully appreciated. Now he's been gone for almost 50 years. So he would be my choice for a dinner conversation. Somewhere in Brooklyn, even though I'm from New York. I'm a Yankees fan too, by the way. So so I'm glad he beat us in 1955. But there you go. So.
Oh, I love that. What a great choice. I'm a big baseball fan myself. And of course, the Braves, we lost to the Phillies, but I wish them luck in the series. And anyway, I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that would be a phenomenal dinner guest for sure. All right. How about you, Bruce?
I forgot to think about this question, so now I'm on the spot, and I've been racking my mind. Well, first off, I already had dinner with Barack Obama because we worked together as community organizers. So, you know what? Okay, so I'll just say something with Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was a freed slave, or he found his way to freedom, and to end up, the abolitionist movement took decades and decades and decades before we got to, the ending of slavery. And then he went on for decades and decades and decades after that. I think when we look at the heart of democracy in this country, it comes from people who are working to live up to that democratic promise. And I think, people like Frederick Douglass, Jackie Robinson, Martin Luther King Jr., the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement in this country, the gay rights movement in this country, they're moving this country, pushing this country to fulfill its democratic promise. And and I think Frederick Douglass is, during his time and what he went through, is just a remarkable inspiration. But there's so many other people too, regular folks.
I don't know how I gave it to y'all because there's no way I could narrow it down, but I love that choice too. I saw a PBS documentary on his life. I don't know if you've seen it, Bruce. It was amazing. There was so much I learned about how he struggled even after, all of the work that he did, because there was always, people that kind of, said he wasn't doing enough, there was so much. It was so interesting. So two great choices. I absolutely love, the both of the individuals that and I wouldn't have thought of them. So, again, awesome. And I really appreciate it again for y'all to talk about the series. And believe it, we are done. And I want to thank you for the great work that you are doing. It is an honor to know both of you. And you know that I love the project, and you know, you also have won a great deal of supporters today. There's no doubt that people watching are going to be wanting to learn more. Thank you so much for all that you are doing to make an impact, and you are truly making a difference, both of you. Thank you again. And I want to also give a gratitude to our audience for joining us, for their unwavering support, which fuels our mission to foster a world where diversity truly thrives. So if you want to stay updated on future episodes and exclusive content, be sure to follow us on diversitymattersseries.com. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, diversitymattersyoutube.com. That's easy, right? So join me next month here, November 22nd, as we also do another great Diversity Matters. We've got Ryan Wayant, who will be on the show. Until then, be kind, be inclusive, and embrace the beauty of diversity. Thank you for tuning in, and see you soon. Bye-bye, everyone. See you tonight.